Hello and welcome to the webinar, Corporate Accountability, a General Counsel Guide to Tackling ESG. With the United Nations Climate Change Conference, COP26, currently underway, it is evident that environmental, social and corporate governance issues have become some of the most pressing topics in the boardroom. The ESG agenda is set to redefine the global business outlook, and in-house legal teams will be pivotal to managing this shift. As a result, General Counsel have found themselves in a unique position to lead and support ESG strategy within their company. In this webinar, we will cover how leading corporate counsel have approached their ESG outlook. My name is Haveen and I'm the digital editor of GC Magazine. And before I introduce our expert panel of speakers today, I would first like to introduce our moderator, Victoria Brackett, Chief Commercial Officer at Irwin Mitchell. Victoria is responsible for the planning and execution of growth plans for the firm. This includes setting the strategy and organic growth, M&A and strategic lateral hires. She has helped to build and support the firm's sector strategy and client relationship management program, which ensures strong engagement. Before this, Victoria trained as a commercial disputes lawyer at Freshfields, specialising in banking and insurance for over a decade. Welcome, Victoria. Feel free to say a quick hello.
Thank you, Harveen. It's great to be here and I look forward to a really good conversation this afternoon.
Now I'd like to warmly welcome our expert panel, who as industry leaders will be sharing their thoughts and experiences with us today. In no particular order, joining us will be Damien Orthoff, General Counsel and Secretary at Pros Holdings. Damien joined Pros in 2011 and is responsible for all legal operations. His specialties include governance, corporate development, finance, and commercial transactions. That's just to name a few. Prior to joining Pros, he served for 6 years as General Counsel for Animal Health International, a publicly traded pharmaceutical distributor. His legal work also covers complex commercial transactions, the company's 2007 initial public offering, numerous acquisitions, and litigation management. Great to have you on the panel today. Welcome, Damien.
Thanks, pleasure to be here.
Next, we have Lawson Crawford, Director and Company Secretary at UCL Business. UCLB commercializes the research from University College London by way of licensing it, creating and supporting a spin-out companies and establishing investment funds. Lawson's role spans the biopharm and physical sciences, the arts and humanities, and managing the patent and wider IP portfolio. Among his interests, Lawson is a trustee of Dulwich Picture Gallery. Welcome, great to have you here, Lawson.
Thanks, Harvey, great to be here.
Next, we have Mark Maurice Jones, General Counsel and Compliance Officer for UK and Ireland at Nestlé. Mark leads a team of 15 staff dedicated to shaping the agenda of Nestlé UK and Ireland through proactive business partnerships and driving a culture of integrity. He is a member of Nestlé UK Force for Good Committee. Before Nestlé, Mark worked for 15 years with Kimberly-Clark in the European, Middle East and Africa region. He started his career as a competition lawyer with international law firms in London and Brussels. Welcome to the session, Mark.
Thanks, Harvey, and good evening, everyone.
We also have Ashley Scott, Head of Policy at Lime. For those who do not know, Lime is a transportation company based in San Francisco that empowers cities with affordable, sustainable transportation options, such as electric bikes and scooters. Ashley oversees the company's global policy messaging, development of its advocacy platform, and regulatory strategy. She is responsible for creating and crafting micromobility regulations and operations in over 150 jurisdictions across the world. She has spoken across the country on emerging issues in micromobility, transportation, and transportation equity. Great to have you here with us today. Welcome, Ashley.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Last but not least, we have Georgie Collins, Partner, Intellectual Property and Media at Irwin Mitchell. Georgie focuses on international brand protection enforcement and also helps brands assess and respond to a range of risk issues that impact reputations. She has worked closely with GCs and in-house teams and takes a lead role in delivering Irwin Mitchell's bespoke events. Georgie is also part of Irwin Mitchell's international team and heads the US desk. Thank you for joining us, Georgie.
Delighted, looking forward to the discussion.
So now the formal introductions are out of the way, we would like to thank Owen Mitchell for sponsoring this webinar. Before I hand over the lanes to Victoria, we just want to let the audience know that if you have any questions throughout the session, please feel free to write them in our Q&A chat boxes, which you should find somewhere on your screen. With that being said, I will now hand over the reins to Victoria. Thank you.
Thank you, Harveen, and hello again, everybody. I appreciate, I said good afternoon, and for some of you in different time zones, I appreciate we're at all different times of the day. I've got a brilliant panel, so I know they're going to make my life really easy. We've had some pre-conversations and I think we believe we could talk for about 9 or 10 hours just on this topic and all the different issues that are arising. We won't do that, please don't worry. We thought we'd try and limit this to about an hour's conversation. We think attention spans start to wane by then, but we're hopeful to bring you a rich hour of good conversation from some leading people in organisations that are really looking after and leading on the ESG strategy across their businesses. We know that ESG is a huge topic for every business at the moment. Brilliant timing that this is right in the middle of COP26. How can we have managed that? That was very well timed, Harveen, in terms of getting it on the stage at the moment, because it's in every newspaper, on every news item across the world, I imagine, at the moment. We've done a report, we've commissioned a report with Legal 500 where we've surveyed a range of GCs across the world. We've had over 190 in-house lawyers respond to that, just in terms of how they are tackling the ESG agenda, the role they are playing in it. And I think there's some really good content in there. We'll try and reference some of that content as we go through this afternoon, but I think you will have all received a copy of that. I would encourage you to read it because it's got some really good things in there. But one of the stats I pulled out was that 96% of the corporate counsel who responded to the survey confirmed that they are well underway in implementing an ESG plan. I don't think I'm particularly surprised by that, but I suppose my question is always, what does that mean? And I think for each industry that we are in, ESG means something different. For each country in the world, ESG means something different. And actually, the prioritization and accent on each of the E, S, and G will mean something different for the business. And I think one of the first questions, just to kick us all off and get us warmed up, I'd like to go to some of our panelists on, is why sustainability is important for each of your businesses. So why is that important? And what are the commercial and strategic drivers that you're thinking about? So just to get that start to think about the prioritization and focus, which I think are themes that will come out through the conversation. So Damien, maybe I could start with you.
Happy to. So for us, we're a software company. And so as a software company that provides enterprise software, sustainability is important for us because our customers rely upon our systems to be able to power their day-to-day operations for a number of critical aspects. So we're not thinking ahead to understand the sustainability and kind of the ongoing operation, maintenance, and how we manage that going forward. It has an interruption to them. So that's a commercial issue for us.
Yeah, so customer expectations really high up on the agenda for you in terms of how you've prioritized some of those issues. And perhaps Mark, could I come to you next from an SA perspective?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, all of us were facing an existential threat. So I would say in relation to the company, I would call it enlightened self-interest to do something about this. In terms of my personal experience, the experience of the company, increasingly what we're facing into is society expects companies to do something about this. A couple of years ago, I was presenting to some school children about what life as an in-house lawyer, and one of the children in the audience asked me quite a tricky question. She asked me the question, I've just been down to the beach. I've just found some of your water bottles, plastic water bottles on the beach. What are you doing about this? This is outrageous. I want to understand what you as a lawyer are doing to stop this. And I'm never going to be purchasing your product again. So that sort of got me thinking, but I think it's an example of, this is increasingly something that society is expecting from us. We're finding that investors are putting more and more pressure on us. So certainly, if you listen to the investor calls that we have on a quarterly basis, we're now being scrutinized what we're doing in the area of ESG. So it's becoming a business imperative. And of course, where you see societal pressure and investor pressure, you start to see pressure from others. So even our own employees want to know what we're doing about this. NGOs are asking, what are we doing about this? The media is looking at us. And increasingly, as we all know, the governments and the legislators are starting to looking at this whole area. So for me, ultimately, people are not interested in doing business with companies that threaten the existence of the world. So for me, it's about enlightened self-interest and something we need to do with that.
That's great, Mark. Thank you very much. And I think you've listed there topics we'll go through during the conversation. There's just so many pressures. I mean, if ESG sits in the centre, I've got this picture in my head of all the different arrows that are driving businesses to have to look at this. And I think, again, one of the themes will come out of the conversation is businesses want it also to be more than a tick box exercise to go to the little girl on the beach. We can't just tick boxes for that. We've got to have a real human story around some of this as well. And I think that's part of the challenge in making this resonate with employees, with customers, with investors, with our supply chain, to make it really feel quite authentic. And again, authenticity is a topic I think that will come up. Lawson, could I come to you next, please, on that question? What's important for your business?
Thanks, Victoria. Much as what's been said before, I think what we're also facing here, we're a research university, and there is tremendous interest in where the results of that research ends up. There's a sense of equity, does it end up in the developed world, or is it extended also to the developing world? On the issue of the sustainability and the environment, increasingly there's pressure from many stakeholders, investors, students, employees want to learn more about it. And of course, that pressure and also that societal expectation is being reflected in the nature of the research is being conducted. In other words, that research focuses on sustainability. It also is also on social equity and also on governance. So those are important drivers for us. And the bigger picture for us is, doing the right thing. Of that moment where this is almost a zeitgeist. It's being in the moment and running with it to we now have the baton. Let's really now get there.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I was just looking at some of the stats in the reports to why GCs had said that this was creeping up their agenda. And almost half actually said the motive is to increase long-term returns. So actually there's a commercial aspect behind that. 12%, Lawson, you'd be pleased to say do because they want to do the right thing. So there's a real social element in there, and 11% talk about the environmental resilience. So I suppose it depends what industries we were talking to there, but it's an interesting that almost half have got a real commercial motive in there as well, which I think is fair enough. But the social agenda also comes through. Ashley, last but not least, from a corporate point of view, just if you could give us Lime's view on this, that would be brilliant. Thanks.
Well, the whole crux of how our business came to be was to battle issues of sustainability, and particularly carbon emissions that come from other forms of transportation. So there is a high level of scrutiny, especially in more of our European markets, such as London and Paris, of holding our feet to the fire and making sure micromobility, both with dockless bikes and scooters, are actually contributing to the overall health of our planet. And that doesn't just mean in how our bikes and scooters are used, it's our supply chain, our end of life, how long or what is the overall span of life for our vehicles. These are all things that we are asked very distinctively by all of our city regulators and really scrutinized on. Why do we consider ourselves to be carbon free in certain areas? What standards are you applying to come up with these talking points? I think we're moving to a place, especially for Lime, where great taglines or good media campaigns around sustainability aren't enough. People actually want to see hard facts and numbers and want to dig deeper into your data. Data is something that people are really asking for on a deeper level, both our customers and our city partners as well.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that data point, you know, and what data and how we measure and what we're measuring and how we define success, and then what frameworks we use across the world. I think, again, big topic for us to unpack a little bit this afternoon. Georgia, I wasn't going to ask you from an Owen Mitchell point of view, but one thing I was interested just with your reputation background was just, you know, there's a reputational risk to this. It's an increasing regulatory risk as well, you know, so we've got the whole spectrum. From a reputational risk point of view, anything you're seeing or hearing from our GC clients that you think would be helpful for the audience around that management of reputational risk and things that they're doing practically to think about that?
Thanks, Vicky. Yes, I mean the reputational risk as a result of getting, you know, the governance, the regulatory framework, the environmental piece wrong, you know, is abundantly obvious to us and to lawyers in terms of what the ramifications of that are in terms of how it peters out, you know, sanctions, fines, litigation. But I think the broader picture is around the doing it right. And, you know, we've mentioned that word authenticity, and that's almost one of the greatest reputational risks for an organization, is to do it for the wrong reasons and not to be authentic as to why they're doing it and how they go about getting this right, doing it for those right reasons, because it is the right thing to do, as opposed to it's a tick box, I've got to tick it because it's a governance piece and there's a regulatory piece, I think is critical and be a testament to those organisations that come out really well and, you know, engender positive consumer, stakeholder, investor feedback compared to those who see it as an exercise of a form of compliance.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I mean, we flagged the theme of authenticity right at the beginning, and we all know that where there's a solid foundation for some sort of assertion or policy or framework, then it looks far more robust and stands up to far greater scrutiny. Damien, you shared in the preparation just a really lovely story about the history of your business and how that's created from a diversity point of view, a really nice foundation. I wonder if you could just bring that to life to the audience for us.
Yeah, sure, happy to. So PROS was founded out of the airline deregulation back in the 1980s here in the US. And as part of that, serving global airlines was every culture, nationality. Combine that with being a software company where innovation is the core of what we do and who we are, right? So if our software isn't consistently getting better, changing and innovating, someone else will replace us and move on, because at the end of the day, it's intellectual property. So one of the things that was unique about PROS when I joined 10 years ago, certainly relative to other businesses I've been with, was just the international aspect of it from the very beginning, where you'd walk around and there would be, 30, 40 different languages spoken from the 50 plus countries that we service around the world. And it's something that as a company that we actually celebrate. So within each of those various diverse groups, we will then have various celebrations throughout the year. Yesterday, we had a Festival of Lights celebration that, albeit virtual, allowed our employees that are from that heritage to share with the rest of us some of the things that they're proud of, they're doing, and it really gives you context that at the end of the day drives diversity of thought, which is obviously something that's very important for us as a software company.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you, Damien. And I think that just really brings to life how if something pervades an organisation, it's true. And Ashley, when we were having the conversations pre this, you said something that really resonated with me, is about and just builds on the authenticity theme around, how that could define your customer base and actually alienate potential targets. How have you dealt with that in your business around, just from a prioritization and focus point of view, that knowledge that actually going a particular way in certain issues could change your customer base or could change customer perception of you? How have you dealt with that?
Having hard and frank conversations with our C-suite. especially acknowledging that I am a woman of color, right? You're often looked to in the S, right? How can we be authentic? How can we speak authentically to our audiences? And in the way that I explained it to our C-suite, especially in light here in the US, the murder of George Floyd spurred a lot of activity, right? Both internationally, because we saw a lot of protests across the world, in London and Berlin, and even in some countries in Asia. And, you know, I explained to them, listen, there's a spectrum of how we can do this. We can either push the conversation, which I think brands like Ben & Jerry's do, right? It's not just affirming what has been put out by activists and social groups, it's pushing it a bit further of saying how the world should be. We can affirm voices, which I called the Nike way of doing this, finding third-party voices such as Serena Williams or Colin Kaepernick to really speak in a way that they think will be authentic, or they can be where I think the majority of our companies are just putting out a statement of we see it and yeah, we agree the world should be a better place, right? Like standing with our employees was a constant term used by many in that place. And it really is when you do that, when you take a position, it's political. And there are many companies that have actually taken the stance of saying, we don't want any political speech in our company. We are here to achieve this business objective. And so therefore, we think it's best that we keep this agnostic, right? Experience, political, world agnostic. We are in a silo out from the outside world. And so when my company comes to me and says, especially with me being in policy, we want to speak on this point, it takes one, research on my side, right? What is going on in the world? How do we turn this around and see all viewpoints? And then pushing the company to say, if we are going to speak on this, let's make sure that we say something that's actually meaningful. Because I think as much as companies don't want to admit that the in solidarity, they think the in solidarity statements are so impactful, a lot of our customers call BS. So sometimes silence is better than speaking. And so those are the hard conversations that you have to have. And sometimes challenging our own C-suite's bias as to what the world is like, right? If I am talking to my white male billionaire C-suite executive about social issues that are happening to those in a Muslim population in France, do they understand or gather the concept? And if we don't, do we need to actually be speaking on it?
Yeah, that's great, Ashley. And I mean, the challenge there of taking the C-suite, I mean, you've gone there at a really, really difficult level, but I think on every issue around ESG, getting the C-suite along, I think is part of the challenge. But I think your comments go back to reputation and what you want to stand for, and as you say, not really wanting to look a fool, because there are things you can talk on with authenticity, and then there are things you just should leave alone, and guiding the business through that, I suspect, particularly in your head of policy role, as you say, that's a really critical part of your function. We have had one question from the audience, which I'm just going to take now, just as we finish the sort of authenticity theme, and it's a leadership consultant that's asked the question. And he says, I'm hearing in my practice that some GCs may not instruct law firms on ESG if they feel the law firms are not walking the ESG talk. What does the panel feel about this, given, for example, the recent and now annual report by the IBA on the global crisis in law firm mental health, which is probably the S in ESG? Definitely, Georgie and I haven't asked that, but it has been asked by somebody. So interested just to hear, I think, the short point from each of you just quickly. How important is it, suppliers generally, but law firms particularly, from this question, that they are walking and talking the ESG path? Damien, perhaps you first.
Yeah, so I think at the end of the day, it's what are the priorities for your business, right? So walking the talk, so to speak, and then pushing that down to your vendors, not just law firm vendors, but broadly, is something that each company needs to be thinking about. And at the end of the day, you may have to make some tough decisions in that regard. Personal experience has been that with the larger law firms, particularly, many of them are much further along than you may actually have a sense of. But if you haven't had those conversations with them on the items that are the most important for your company specifically, that's probably the best place to start.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And Mark?
They're kind of similar to Damien. I mean, we have our values. So if we're going to, adhere to those values, we have certain expectations of our suppliers, so the law firms now. So we'd be looking at them to at least be heading in the kind of the direction that we're heading in. And so, like Damien, we work chiefly with the big law firms, and we've not, I've never had a situation where I've had to terminate a law firm, but certainly we're expecting them to at least be heading the same sort of direction as we are, and trying to meet our values. That's
great. Thank you, Mark. And Lawson, anything you would like to add to that?
Absolutely. I mean, simply for us, we like to work with people who we like and who can do the work very well. And that is reflected fundamentally in the makeup of the people at that firm. And also what their, to Mark's point about what the values are. And, I think we would certainly, not only for law firms, but across the piece, look at who we are working with. And also, it's to investors, for instance, who are probably less influence on that side of the equation, but certainly when it comes to our suppliers, the people who are professional services team, we just did a panel review, for instance, and that was, ESG was on the criteria. Firms had to answer to that. But even so, it's beyond, greenwashing. We want to see that in practice. And as I said before, we like to work with people who, can do the job and, we like. So, and that authenticity, that word authenticity, comes across in that interaction.
Yeah, I think that's really fair. And certainly from our side as a law firm's point of view, the panel tenders and the documents we're seeing are definitely demanding evidence on where we sit from an ESG point of view. I think there is that human factor, isn't there, of getting to know the lawyers that you work with and understanding their values and making sure that those are aligned. But increasingly, and rightly so, we've been asked for evidence around our ESG. And just to move that on slightly, that question of evidence is a really difficult one, isn't it? Investors, supply chains, your own customers, I'm sure, are asking you the same questions around, how can you demonstrate to us that you're doing this? How do you guide the C-suite through that as the in-house team, the head of the in-house team, to make sure the board is ready to be able to answer some of those questions from an evidence point of view? Perhaps, Ashley, if I could come to you on that one.
Yes. So really, it's knowing, I think, to simplifying a bit, it's knowing the numbers yourself before you even think about reaching out to the public. I think by just the ecosystem of our business, we are required to explain those numbers. For example, our business is centered around tenders, RFPs, depending on where you are in the world, you may call it something different. But the tender that we're doing in Melbourne, for example, explicitly asks how many women that we have on our working within our organization. How are we going to support the Aboriginal community? What companies have we engaged with? So on a city by city basis, we are having to display this information to our city partners. And when advising our C-suite on how, whether we come out with something public, right? So the larger tech companies such as come out with diversity reports or overall workforce reports or what they're doing, what I tell them is that if we are going to do this, it is an outline of things that the public can hold us accountable on. So we have to be very clear that we're ripe enough as a company to do something like that on a large stage scale. And I give a lot of empathy to companies when you're a younger company, you know, to feel pressured into doing that, I think it's a conversation and it's a choice, and it isn't a choice you should feel pressured in. But I do think as you grow and become center on the world stage, it's almost a requirement, which we're trying to now get the company prepared for as we continue to grow and scale.
Yeah, that requirement for transparency and therefore authenticity and being able to evidence is just going to grow and grow, I think, isn't it? So I think it's something we've all got to keep on our radars. Mark, from your point of view, you know, sort of just getting the board along with you in terms of metrics and understanding what you are measuring and what you want to say to the outside world. How do you, what's your role in that? How do you manage that with the board?
I just want to kind of reiterate what you just said, namely, transparency for a company like Nestle is key. It's, you know, we talked earlier about the expectation of society. You know, we're a company with a lot of history. We're a big company, so people want to know what we're doing. So we you know, on a global level, every year we issue a very full sustainability report with all of our KPIs and a description of what we're doing in all areas of ESG, on the environmental side, the societal governance, you know, that's something that then gets, you know, scrutinized by the board, by stakeholders very, very regularly. We get questioned and quizzed on it. So, but it all goes to the whole transparency point, and I think that's essential. I think for companies to have the trust of society and the public, they have to issue those types of things and be ready to be cross-examined and be asked those difficult questions.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think getting the board ready for that is becoming an increasing, I suspect, part of your roles as GCs. And we'll probably just come back to sort of transparency in a little while. But there's been another question which I'm just interested in, and we did talk about it a little bit in preparation. And one of the audience has said that there's a lot of concentration on the E, some on the S, very little on the G. Why is that? And what can you as in-house counsel do to advance a more comprehensive narrative? Great question, I think, one we could probably talk about for ages. But Damien, do you want to kick off with that one?
Yeah, so I think this is one that can vary pretty wildly depending on the type of business you're in. For those that are publicly listed, the G is table stakes. And so anybody that's been around a listed company for any period of time knows all of the various rules, regulations, and best practices that go into being able to do that. And so I think that's actually, of the three topics within ESG, I think that's the one that, at least as lawyers, we more easily swim directly to and know how to go about solving. And so I think the reason you're not seeing maybe as much topic focus there is just that it is a little bit more established, particularly on some of the public company, you know, reporting, you know, compliance, that sort of work. But I do think at the end of the day, the G actually has an overlay into the E and the S, right? So because no matter what you're going to be going through and doing in those regards, if you don't have a governance overlay mindset towards it, how are you having the metrics? How are they being captured? How are you doing continual improvement? And then how are you baking all of those items into your board oversight process? So, you know, do you have a one director that's lead on it? Is it split out amongst various committees? How is the management team looking at it? But I think that is kind of the underpinnings beneath all of it. And then now we need to work with our colleagues in various other functions and specialties to be able to go make progress using their expertise. So.
Brilliant, thank you. Sorry, I struggled with the unmute button there. No, I think that's right. I was interested in the report. One of the GC findings was 57%, so more than half, said that the ESG strategy within their organisation was led by either nobody or only one person. And I think there's definitely a sense that it's split across the business, and that coordination role is becoming increasingly important. Again, it'll depend on the size of the business, I suspect, the industry that they're in, but I was interested in that. That was quite a high percentage, I thought, to actually have no or only one person actually in charge of all of that. Lawson, from your perspective, ES or G, is the balance right? We've had a comment from the audience, not a question. There needs to be more focus and discussions on the S and the G.
Sure.
You agree?
I agree 100%. I think there's a lot more focus on the E than the S and the G. And it's not as if I'm allowed to back up a bit, you know, before those three letters, we had CSR. And CSR was seen as the aspirational, the whole, it was the icing on the cake if you could get it. And so we've gone beyond CSR to this is ESG, which is crucial. But even so, I think the point you made earlier, Victoria, the E is of moment, COP26, so it is quite topical at the minute. But my fear is that with the topicality of COP26, the momentum, to Ashley's point, in the past 18 months around George Floyd and other issues of S and also G become lost. And I believe it's certainly important that we keep the S and the C-suite is kept in mind. The S and the G are important. I think also to the extent they are more regulations or probably more E and G, for instance, the regulation around, anyway, I think to the extent in the UK, we may have laws about S, but then to the extent that we see those laws reflected in the organizations that we actually work for, not on a pure legal level, but who actually works with us and for us, that's slightly may not represent the UK or the UK populace for that matter. And I think therefore that certainly all the letters need to be borne in mind. Bearing in mind that, as I said before, I think we're at a moment now when the world's mind or focus is shifting even more to the realization that, sorry, it sounds a bit trite, but we're all in it together. It's one planet. We're all going to be here, whether we like each other or not. and so it will take a very fundamental shift in the paradigm of, human dignity, sustainability, transparency, and fairness for us to get this completely wrong.
Yeah, I think that's right. That all in it together. I mean, certainly, I think COVID's just accelerated that sentiment as well, hasn't it? That's brought us as a world, I think, closer together. We've lived one big pandemic globally. We've all had our individual stories, but there's been that one global pandemic that has united us and made us think quite differently. And I think definitely, the S and the G have been. I wonder whether the environmental one's the kind of one that we're really struggling to just work out how we tackle that. The S, I think, certainly in terms of, and I know it's not limited to, but diversity and inclusion has been a topic on the board agenda for a while. I think it's increasingly becoming a regulatory risk. It scrutinises executive pay, for example, diversity statistics at boardroom level. Those sorts of things are becoming far more front and centre. But it's possibly, certainly I think in my own organisation, the S is something we've with CSR we've been looking at for a long time, and the environmental thing is a newer topic for us too. So I wonder whether that's just giving it a bit more of an accent to certain industries. But I agree with you. I think it's all got to level back out because they're all equally important. And I agree with you, Damien. I think that G just pervades the whole thing. Georgia, I just wondered from your perspective, just from GC conversations that you'll have been having, whether you're seeing a tendency of GCs, whether there's a particular element of the ESG agenda that they are focusing on, or whether you are seeing that diversity across all aspects.
I think it's really mixed, and I think it goes back to, it depends sort of the size of the organisation and the industry that you're in, which drives those. But certainly for a large majority of our GC community, I mean, the G is their front of centre. It really is. They own the G, and for a number of them, the G is what gets the E and the S right, and helps shape all of those things. But again, it pivots to a greater or lesser degree, I think, depending on organisation size and what industry that you're in.
Great, thank you, Georgie. And Mark, just finally coming to you on this point. Has Nestle got the balance right?
I don't know if we've got the balance right, but certainly we don't kind of just ignore the S and focus completely on the E. I think, to Damien's point, I think the G kind of permeates everything. I think that is something that we do reasonably well. But certainly here in the UK, on the S side of things, we've one of our big priorities is our diversity and inclusion initiatives. It's a big focus for us, but we also similarly look at on the E at lots of different things. So yeah, I don't really have much to add to what everybody else has said.
That's great. Thanks, Mark. That's brilliant. And just going to move us on slightly to a conversation around, I think, just a recognition perhaps that, as I started off, I think ESG means different things across different industries and in different worlds. And I think one of the things, having done a few of these conversations and talking to my own clients about this, we are all at different stages of this journey. I think sometimes there's that slight fear factor that we're not quite doing what everyone else is doing, and sort of looking around and thinking that we might not be in the right space, and have we got it right? And I think it's important. I think no one's got it there yet. I think no one's cracked ESG, and when they do, they'll be very rich. And we probably never will. It'll be an evolving, and it's okay to be at different stages of the evolution. But clearly, when we're learning and we're learning together, collaboration becomes really important. So I'm just interested from the panel, what level of collaboration do you see either across your industries or within the GC community generally on this, and how you educate yourselves and how you find out and go back to the board with your words of wisdom? Because I think for our audience, that'd be really interesting, just how you're learning to do that. Mark, you've come off mute. Did something you wanted to say?
So I kind of asked myself that question really at the beginning of this year, because as you just said, this whole ESG agenda is enormous, and anyone that says they're an expert in this, I think, is just talking rubbish. I haven't yet met an expert in all of the different elements of ESG. So beginning of the year, I asked myself, what could I do to educate myself more in this area? What more could I do? I felt, that there's so much discussion in the media around these areas, but I was a little bit confused myself as to what I could do. So I found out about an organisation here in the UK called Lawyers for Net Zero, which is focused, clearly on the E side of things, and that is an organisation run for kind of like-minded in-house lawyers, and that's been a fantastic vehicle, firstly to educate myself, but also to have those discussions, to share best practice, to start to advocate externally, both on behalf of Nestle, but also on behalf of Lawyers for Net Zero. So I think there's a lot we could do. As you say, there is a sort of a fear factor around some of these things, that if you go into the outside world and you do the wrong thing or you say the wrong thing, you're going to get sort of hit over the head by, whether it's the media or by NGOs or whatever. But I think, but at the same time, I think collaboration is key, because no one is an expert. So my view is just, get out there. You're not going to be an expert, but don't wait until you're an expert, because you'll be waiting a long time. And my experience is people are actually, you used the word authenticity earlier. If you go about things in an authentic way, if you accept that you're not perfect, if you accept you make mistakes, if you take the feedback when you get the feedback, but deal with it authentically. My experience is people are pretty forgiving. So I would just encourage everybody to just get out there, contribute and kind of learn, as you go along.
Yeah, I agree with that. Some really sensible things in there. And I think we're all teaching ourselves, aren't we, every day about this topic. Ashley, from your perspective, collaboration, either industry collaboration, legal collaboration, how are you keeping yourself in tune with the latest things that are relevant for your business? Because of course, as Mark says, it's an enormous topic. So we can't be at every piece of learning on the whole ESG agenda. But how do you manage to keep you all in and up to date that's relevant for your business?
So bringing in a lot of outside experts. I mean, I can answer quickly as far as industry collaboration. There isn't as much, because really our progress, at least for our business in the ESG arena, is the competitive advantage. Who can progress at a faster rate and speak to kind of the heartstrings of the public, both our city stakeholders and our riders, right? Like that's the edge, getting someone to feel connection with our brand versus another brand based on what we say and what we do and what we stand for. Internally, it really is, for example, when we wanted to understand how to create a more sustainable supply chain. We brought in a consultant. We have a policy advisory board on issues of safety, on issues of equity, on issues of sustainability, to that we can reference and ask questions. And it's really, you know, I will say our department, policy and regulatory law really is a drumbeat for the rest of the company. You know, giving an example, even our workforce, there's a part of our workforce that is a part of the gig economy, right? That are independent contractors. But as we continue to expand across Europe, we found a resounding visceral reaction from some of our city stakeholders, and just taking writings on the wall from other companies that have received backlash from using independent contractor workers. So that prompted, you know, our conversation with our operations side to say, all right, let's pinpoint places where we need to evolve in the way, you know, that we bring on workers, the bringing full-time work. What are we offering? How can we offer professional development? Really, for us, in order to survive, we have to stay very attuned to what people care about. So it's really bringing in experts to help educate ourselves fast. And then also talking to our other business verticals to say, hey, here's what we're hearing, and we need to make changes in order to make sure that we stay a competitive company.
And is that an easy process, Ashley? Challenging the verticals from an ESG perspective to change how they do things?
No, because sometimes what's best for the world is not best for your P&L. You know,
Absolutely.
when you are trying to stay EBITDA positive, transferring to a whole full-time employee workforce, that has a cost. So really it is the balance of, and finding a place in the middle of, well, where do we take the stand? Where does this make sense? Is this a call across the world, across, you know, the 200 cities we serve, or is it a particular country where we need to make this stance and then amplify this message? But it is very hard conversations about what leads to better margins.
Yeah, no, I get that. Yeah. Well, there's the commercial side, isn't there? And then the this is what the world thinks we should do, and we actually believe we want to do that. You know, I genuinely believe businesses are very invested in this agenda, but commerciality tends to trump at the board table, and persuading the board that that's possibly something they need to rethink, it is very difficult. And I think you talked about another pressure there, which is the people pressure, sort of our employees and their expectations around this agenda. And I wonder, Damien, if you could perhaps just comment from your perspective just on that employee dynamic, because there's another group of people we need to keep happy through this, isn't there?
Yeah, no, and I would say of the ESG topics that kind of matter most for a software company, that really is probably one of the biggest ones. Because if we don't have the best and brightest people to be able to go and innovate, then we don't have a business long term. So, you know, at our core, it was really a matter of how do we go build the business that we want to work for, right? And then allowing everybody else to bring all of their thoughts to that. And I think that the transparency piece is really kind of step one in that. So I'd challenge folks, even where you're not ready necessarily to go, or for strategic reasons you don't want to go share information externally, just starting the process of capturing the data, again, what matters most to your business. And that can be different things for different of us. But looking at that, monitoring it, it's really, at the end of the day, the only way you're going to make progress on lots of these things. Again, whether it's diversity, inclusion, or any of these other topics, if it really is around employee experience, retaining best and brightest, right? People's views on the companies they want to work for have changed pretty substantially, and I think COVID has driven that. I mean, we've read in the Wall Street Journal about the Great Resignation and some of the impact from that, and I don't know of any businesses that are immune from it. So if you don't have that mindset going in on what matters and how are we going to create the competitive advantage that Ashley talked about, that competitive advantage matters as much for employees as it does in your actual go-to-market.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that, and I think, I mean, Georgie, we're definitely seeing, aren't we, from our own employees, that need to be and appear, and evidence, back to the transparency point that Mark made, you know, that we are committed to a proper ESG agenda. I mean, Georgia, I don't know whether you want to pick up on a couple of things we're hearing internally around, you know, what we need to do and what our diversity boards are looking at.
Well, yeah, I mean, that there's lots in there. I mean, in terms of, you know, if one looks, we've got as a firm great representation, I think, in terms of the split between sort of male to female ratios. The gender pay gap stuff we've done is great, but then you look at the board and you say, okay, predominantly white males, one female. So, you know, there's work to be done there. Just picking up on what Damien said on the social side of things. I mean, you said at the beginning, Vicky, that COVID has kind of like really even thrown ESG much more into the spotlight, and it definitely has around the S piece. And just going back to one of the questions at the beginning, I think it was from Karen, was talking about sort of mental health and looking after people. You know, that's just becoming ever more important, much more so than it was before, in terms of how we're looking after our people. And Damien, what you said, you know, same for us. We want to attract the best talent, we want to keep them, and how you look after them is absolutely critical, particularly in this slightly new formed world. And what we did before doesn't quite go again. And we've reviewed how our people are in our business in terms of how they work. They're flexible by choice. It's very different to how it was 2 years ago. And that's something which they really love by majority. But it's a big change. But we've been really forced to change a lot by COVID, and with many things which then move into this ESG arena. So, you know, that's something which has been a great success for us. But there's other things that we need to concentrate on.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Georgie.
There's a question
there's a question that's come up, which is for all of you. Is there sufficient regulatory support for GCs to champion good ESG decisions at board level? So have you got the regulatory backing to do that? Lawson, perhaps maybe I can come to you first on that one.
Thank you. Probably the answer is probably yes and no. So somewhat then.
That's a great lawyer answer.
Somewhat. I mean, certainly the regulations, sorry, I have to clarify this, on a day-to-day, what I would encounter, doesn't, even on the E part of the agenda, doesn't really have an impact on me per se, in terms of reporting, environmental reporting, etc. But it's definitely coming. You know, the ball is already rolling, and certainly the announcements on the UK government yesterday in terms of further environmental reporting. You know, okay, it's extended to companies of a certain size, but then, you know, that increasing pressure from other bodies, etc. So, to answer so yes and no.
Okay.
But then, Vicky, if you allow me, but then it goes beyond that. In terms of getting to the board level, it goes beyond just the regulations. It goes back to the very point of doing not only what's the right thing, but what is the what's the moral compass looking like, taking that long-term view and saying, what's the world going to look like? What's the world likely to look like? And also, can we defend this in the school of public opinion now and in the future? So in other words, don't let lack of regulations scare you.
No, absolutely. I wonder if it was just ballast to make your position stronger. Damien, from the US point of view, how would you respond to that question?
It's one that's
United
tough.
States.
Yeah, no. So I would say it's one that's tough because here in the US we have so much that's split between the state and the federal level. And so a lot of the topics that the EU, for example, on the privacy side is handled with GDPR and have a framework that works kind of across. Everything here is a little more episodic because of this bifurcation between the state and federal. But if I back up and say 50,000 foot, kind of where do I think that we fall out? I think the challenge is that the regulators for a lot of these topics are in many cases much further behind where businesses are on these topics. They may not have the expertise, they may not have the resources to even understand what some of the challenges are. I certainly see that when you think about it from regulating technology specifically, which is a space that we're in, they don't understand what it is, and the pace with which they move is so slow that the technology changes faster than the laws can even go keep up. So I think that you need to have a framework. It needs to be sufficient enough to drive the conversation. But if we're relying upon regulators to drive to an outcome, I think we're always going to be disappointed with the outcome. I mean, I think to the point that was made, if we don't think about the moral compass of what the right thing is as fiduciaries for our stockholders, thinking about our employees, and really trying to be, well, not just one step, but multiple steps in front of it. Because I think at the end of the day, this is really a journey that we're never going to get to the destination. It's going to pivot. There's going to be something new. We're going to learn something else. This is really just the first time that all of these things have been brought together. Because if you think 10, 15, 20 years ago, a lot of these topics were all in existence. They just didn't have the prominence. So prominence matters, but if the regulators can't wait on them to be able to get to where we need to go. That's my take.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. Mark, you were nodding. You were nodding along to that.
I agree with what everything Damien just said, which is that I think regulation lags a little bit what society expects. And I think the board and the companies are looking at what society is looking for. What is the right thing to do? The example I gave earlier, where I was challenged around plastic bottles on a beach. I think we've realized for a long time that we've got an issue there. The public is expecting us to do something. Latterly, we're starting to see regulation around things like plastic tax. And so I think if you wait for regulation, you're going to be waiting for a long time. I think boards have to preempt that.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good. And I think that gets into that really murky area of how do you measure what good ethics are, and your company will probably has to take its own view on that, and it goes all the way back actually to what you were talking around this, where you are going to take a stance publicly and where perhaps you'll be slightly more reticent or your voice will be a bit quieter. And I suspect actually for you, because you're so global, that will change also depending on what area of the world you're in. I mean, you were telling me about the diversity of what ESG means across the world. I mean, I don't know whether you want to share that with the audience.
Right. I think in reaction, I might be the outlier. Cities really drive us to our company improvements. And I think that is because we are regulated more so on the municipal level than the federal level, where there is a lower threshold to change laws, right? A city can enact a law every month, every week, if it wants to, right? Versus, the federal level. So I think great examples are our implementation of cargo bikes in order to move our scooters was driven by the city of Paris, because our business is dependent on tenders, which are competitive documents in which we have to market ourselves to the wants and the needs. And I call our business a municipal cities hackathon, right? They put out their grandiose ideas of how they want the world to be, and we have to come up with some substantive solution to do that. The city of Portland in the US, they pushed us into our first life cycle analysis. For example, Dublin, we're not in there yet, but they want to know how we can create our scooters, but also not deter people from walking, right? So our business is very much driven by the policy goals. Copenhagen, we just applied for that permit. All of it was about the E. What is your supply chain? What do you do with your batteries? How often do you dispose your batteries? Do you use interchangeable parts for your scooters? Do you just get rid of them? So I think our business is so unique in the fact that we have pushed ourselves more than I think we would have in the 4 years that we've been in existence, because cities are essentially that carrot that we are running after, and we need the city permission in order to have a business. So it's great in one point in the fact that it's always a novel idea of, okay, the city wants this, what are we going to do? But it's also maddening because it's hard to settle into one way of doing things before we have to move on to the next.
Brilliant. And do you know what? I think that just illustrates brilliantly how diverse this topic is and how it means so many different things to different people, and how each business is going to be influenced by different things that it needs to respond to. And that goes all the way back to my fearful of not doing the right thing. I think it's about understanding your own business, your own values and culture. What's the priority for your business, and how are you going to demonstrate with authenticity that you are making a difference? So I think that's a brilliant example, Ashley, of looking at it through a very different lens. Last topic, I think, just quickly before we wrap up, I was just going to talk quickly about investment. In the survey, when I was looking through that, unsurprisingly, I think it says that 92% of the in-house counsel that answered said that ESG had become an essential part of influencing investment decisions, and they integrate ESG into every investment decision that they make and as part of their decision-making process. So I'm not surprised by that at all. What I am interested in, however, is the investment in your ESG agenda, because that's a business cost. It's a cost customers aren't massively excited about absorbing. So is it an area for investment, and where have your priorities been in terms of your investment? Damien, shall I start with you?
Yeah, happy to. So it certainly is an area that you have to invest in, because if you're not going to invest in it, how are you ever going to get any better at it, right? Whether that investment is time or people. When you think about the social side of it, if you just think about the financial impact of employee turnover on a business, the disruption that comes from that, if you're not taking the S side into effect with the employee base, there's a direct business cost. And so what investments are you going to make for that? When you move to some of the other areas, again, the G is a really easy one, because that's highly regulated and for many of us. And so we know the financial output for that. So to get investment to avoid that bad outcome, I think is simpler. For us, I think the one that is, I won't say more of a challenge, but just given our space, unlike for Mark, where the E is obviously something they're very mature on, as a cloud software company, we actually have a pretty light footprint if you think about the types of emissions that we would have. But how do we go about marketing that? How do we go about tracking it? What investments are we making to be able to really move the needle there? And I would say that's an area that, if I'm just being transparent, is I don't know that we know what good looks like for a tech company specifically, and how do you measure the E with quantitative? Like on the qualitative side, it's very simple. And I know we're doing the right things, and I know that our hearts are all in the right places. But when push comes to shove and you start getting into some of the quantitative metrics on the environmental side, I don't think we know what the target is we're trying to hit yet as an industry.
Yeah, I mean, and we haven't even got to the metrics topic, which I hoped we would, but I think we're going to run out of time. But that lack of uniformity of metrics across any industry yet, and certainly globally across the world, in order to be able to prove, and Lawson, you were really vociferous in our prep around greenwashing, being able to prove some of this stuff, I think is another problem entirely. Lawson, from an investment point of view, from your business point of view, is it a priority? How are you deciding on investment decisions around that?
Absolutely a priority. Reasons already mentioned. At present, in terms of measurability, it's looking on our KPIs and defining precisely what those KPIs are. In terms of the investment decisions, in terms of basic due diligence, also looking to see who our investment partners are, looking to see who our licensees are. We have certain obligations to meet from a fundamental governance piece anyway, so to speak, who we can't invest with or can't partner with. But even so, it goes beyond that to looking as to who we are working together with, then, so to speak. And that drive is coming from all different angles. And certainly there is C-suite, not only C-suite, board involvement, or they're raising those questions. So definitely investment is happening from a UCLB perspective. Yes.
Brilliant. And Georgie, would you say that's picked up amongst our GC contact community, that it is an investment priority? I mean, as Damien says, unless you spend the money, we're not going to move forward, are we?
Yeah, absolutely. And what we've seen with a number of them is they're doing exactly that. I mean, I think it came out in some of the surveys that they're looking at establishing ESG, a specific ESG team, for which you know, legal will be a key component part.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, one of the other topics, again, I'd have liked to have touched on it, because I loved Damien's phrase of swim lanes when we were talking. It's how do you organise all of this across an organisation, and where does legal sit? And I think at the moment very much managed in different swim lanes, with HR perhaps taking on some of the S side, and obviously legal leading around the G. But that coming together of a team, the setting up of even ethics boards, I don't know. I think there's so much corporate structure that's going to come out of this agenda. Again, I think it's a topic for a whole new seminar. Just by way of summary, I've been jotting down as we've gone. You know, I think there's pressures coming from society expectation, from investor scrutiny, from employees, from the legislator, from the supply chain, coming at us from all angles. This isn't an area that anyone has the answer to. We're all learning together. But the key themes that came out for me today were authenticity, that ability to be authentic, be able to prove, to have confidence in what we can approve, and to defend our position almost, and to know our value positions. So going to Ashley's point, that we can talk with conviction where we need to, but we actually don't look ridiculous where we don't have the values that sit behind that. Collaboration, it sounds like there's good collaboration across the GC community, but maybe we can do even more there. And accountability, what is the right thing to do, and are we accountable to our customers, to the girl on the beach with the plastic bottle? How are we addressing those sorts of things? I think we've touched an enormous number of topics, so thank you all. I was just going to quickly zip round, just as GCs, is there one piece of advice for all the GCs that are sitting out there, you know, any tidbit of advice you'd like to throw out to them at the end? Damien.
So for me, it was a learning that I had not that long ago, which is just as you dig in on the E side, don't assume that's going to be something you can make material progress in a short period of time. Think about that in the form of years of time to be able to get to where you can actually have metric targets put out, because of all the baselining and analysis and data collection that needs to be done. So my advice would be, if you know your customers or your other constituents are going to be driving you to an outcome in that, be thinking back at least 2 years before you think you're going to need to be there, because otherwise you're going to get there and not be able to do it.
Yeah, great advice. Mark?
Yeah, just a few things I would say. Firstly, stay humble and be honestly self-critical. Secondly, collaboration is key. No one has all the answers. And thirdly, don't wait until you're an expert. Just get out there and do it.
Yeah, I've heard that a couple of times. And lawyers find that quite hard, because we like to know all the answers, don't we? But we are learning together. Lawson?
Get on board. If you're not there already, if you're not there and ready in terms of understanding the issues around ESG, bring oneself up to speed immediately with a view to influencing. I mean, we have the unique position of being the voice of reason, oftentimes within our organizations, who take that long-term, arc of history view, so to speak. So I think we have that. If there's one time, or among the times that GCs can demonstrate value, it's this one particular piece around ESG.
That's great, thank you. And Ashley?
Make sure to practice radical candor. At the end of the day, you serve your client, and your client is coming to you for an unfiltered understanding of what they are getting into. And so sometimes for fear of offending, or for fear of speaking out of turn, we're not as radically candid about issues of ESG as we should. And so to always remember to sometimes say, maybe we're not ready to say something, maybe we do. And I think the easiest way that I've done that is always being able to tie a business objective to that radical candor.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, obviously being able to tie it back to strategy, I think is always a good thing. And Georgie? I know you're not a GC, but I thought you might have a takeaway point.
I think just overall, my takeaway and what I see is GCs are the kind of beacon of responsible conduct in an organisation, and to a greater or lesser degree, the E, the S or the G definitely sits within the GC community, but whether like it or not, this is very much part of the GC space, and I think GCs are uniquely placed to lead this where they want to lead it in terms of the position that they occupy within an organisation.
That's great. I think that's a great point to end on, a great opportunity for all the GCs across the world to lead on this, to influence, to be the voice of reason. So thank you very much to my panelists. Thank you very much to the audience and for the questions. It's always great to get some, and to the Legal 500 for hosting this, and to you, Harveen, for making sure we all behaved ourselves. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Victoria. I just wanted to say a special thank you for hosting such an insightful discussion. I believe this was asked in the chat, but I thought I'd just say it. If you are interested in viewing the discussion today, there was a lot of insightful comments, and you might want to revisit some of the points. It will be available on our on-demand site somewhere on the Legal 500 website. So be sure to catch that in a couple of days. Thank you all the panelists for taking the time to, share your expertise. I know schedules can get busy, so we really appreciate that, and everyone can enjoy the rest of their day. Thank you.